Hello, my name is Quentin from Idiot Reads and Rambles, and I'm here doing a video that I wanted to do for quite a while called My Literary Support Group, which I think is awesome to get a conversation going about this stuff, because I think we all have those authors who we return to when we feel sad. And particularly me, I realize that I return to the same kind of collection of authors, and I wanted to ask myself, why do I return to these authors, these genres, these people, these sort of modes of writing? What is it that I want to get out of them? And that really, thinking about that led me to understand even myself a lot better. So I would highly recommend you do the same. Definitely think about what you read when you're sad and why you read it and what you're seeking out of it. This is the result of what I was kind of thinking about. So I came up with a couple categories. Sympathy. When I read an author when I'm sad, I oftentimes look for a kind of sympathy or sympathetic attitude that they would have to a more melancholy type. You know, no one wants to read an author that's just incredibly cruel when they're sad. And if you do, I would probably rethink why you're reading that author. You're not going to Sylvia Plath when you feel sad, I hope. Even though she is sympathetic, her sympathy leads to a very dark place. If you feel like that's sympathetic, it's going to lead somewhere really dark. Anyways, I look for sympathy, a sympathetic attitude with the writer. I look for humor a lot of the time because, you know, I can't really resist a good chuckle. And once I start laughing, I oftentimes wind up feeling better shortly after. I look for a really beautiful kind of piece of writing that makes me just go, wow. And I'm so taken with the beauty that the melancholy kind of fades for a second. I look for joy and positivity in a piece of writing sometimes that really kind of helps me realize that, you know, or helps me remember the feeling of joy. Because oftentimes, even if you're sad for 2 hours, it somehow feels like it's all that you've ever felt. It's a weird thing that the mind does, but totally irrational. It's nice to be reminded of that joy and positivity. And then the last one I'll save for later, but I think it might be the most interesting. So let's just go through some of the writers. I told you I like sympathetic voices. And the thing about sympathetic voices is that they can be sympathetic in a bunch of different ways for me. The book I reread that made me sort of think about doing this whole thing was Candide, which is a satire of optimism, the idea that we're living in the best possible world. And in it, Voltaire just basically destroys this idea with all the worst types of human suffering. It also would fall under humor. There's a harem of women who have been chopped. One of their buttocks has been chopped off to feed the army. It's really bizarre and funny, even though the characters do read like robots a lot of the time in this massive satire machine. There's a really strong sympathy for human suffering in these pages that I really enjoy. The next one is definitely humor as well. It's Philip Larkin. Of course, I'm gonna pick Larkin. I really relate to a lot of his poems and his capacity to sort of blatantly put a problem out there that I really feel, and on top of that, to sort of insert spots of humor. It's just really for me. I just love, specifically Obeyed, that feeling if you've been thinking about something bad for so long, and then all of a sudden, right at the end, the postman like doctors go from house to house. You've been thinking about, you know, something bad for a while, and then you see someone you know, and immediately it's like they heal you, and you're just like, hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? And you're just really annoying. That kind of really resonates with me, along with a bunch of stuff in his collections. Of course, this one I've talked about on the channel. This is a very sympathetic voice, very sympathetic to grief. I'm talking about Tarje Vesas, of course, but this sympathy leads to a really good place where the sort of grief that Sis feels for someone in this book is actually sort of explained and resolved by the end of it. Kind of a reminder to me to very much seek human connection in times of melancholy that sometimes I do forget, not very often. I'm very nervous this video is going to make me seem like a weird psycho who is just depressed all the time. I'm very much not, but these are authors that I've kind of noted over the past little bit. And, you know, talking about sympathetic voices, how could I not mention Richard Brautigan? You just kind of have to. This sort of really interesting, detached, tender sympathetic melancholy that I feel in his books, and especially that woolliness where you're not exactly sure how someone is feeling, even if they're the narrator. They feel kind of vacant and aloof in some spots. That really speaks to me as well. So of course, in Watermelon Sugar is one of those that very much speaks to me. But I feel like that really speaks to all this these dopamine hits in tech. It's like this candy colored world that you kind of feel hollow in the midst of. Is it a sin to say that on BookTube? Anyways, Willard and his bowling trophies, this falls into humor as well. I love the story of Bob and Constance. There's so much sympathy for, you know, things that have gone and crumbled with time in this story that I can't help but just feel kind of hugging me. And also it's just hilarious in spots. And of course, So the Wind Won't Blow It All Away, which is a very funny book in some instances, but also just very sympathetic, especially in the main character's fate. To me, that idea of feeling like you're on the outside of, or like you almost don't belong in this fantasy of yours, and, you know, of your cultures, maybe. The culture part I don't really resonate with, but the fantasy, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I'm very hopeless about my fate after the whole school thing. Nothing to be scared about. I know I'll do fine, but, you know, So the Wind Won't Blow It All Away. Anyways. Oh my god. Okay, so humor, and these books, I search for a laugh, because oftentimes I find myself smiling, I find myself laughing, and all of a sudden that just ignites the good vibes, and the good vibes carry on. Oh, wait, but first, of course, I have to talk about The Anatomy of Melancholy. You know, this is actually incredibly tedious in spots, and I really like it, but it's not really, because this is a book from the 1600s. It is it purports to be a medical book. It has no sort of boundaries where, you know, it talks about what is melancholy. I'm going to cut it up in a million different ways, and I'm going to talk about it. You realize that Robert Burton, the author, is writing from a state of what we would call clinical depression, and he very much cares. It is a beautiful feeling to just watch him try to figure it out as best as he can, to feel this man thinking through all of this so intensely, like his life depends on it for so many of these. He's also, there's passages in here of very gentle humor, but of course what makes this tedious is that it's so steeped in old medical terms, like, you know, the humors, all that. Anatomy of Melancholy, absolutely. It is very therapeutic, if tedious, read. Pretty good stuff. And then humor, we're at humor. Of course, I'm talking about trout fishing in America. I laugh in almost every single chapter of this. I cannot read this book with a straight face. I can't read it for 10 pages without laughing. So, of course, this has to be in here. Also, the nonsensical aspects to this really highlight America's, like, the capacity for creativity that I find is very beautiful and a great reminder. Of course, The Hawkline Monster, just a really fun, funny book that is also, one of my categories is immersion. I don't know if I mentioned that, but this would also qualify as immersion. And this one is about a creative writer who, you know, he's writing this story about a sombrero, a freezing cold sombrero that falls from the sky. He says, oh, that sucks. He crumbles it up, he throws it in the trash, and then all of a sudden, it begins playing out in the trash. It's a really positive, sort of good vibes and hilarious story about why you should never throw that story away and deny yourself the creativity that you surely have in you, being a person. And of course, writing is his venue, but it applies to more things than writing. So, Sombrero Fallout, absolutely hilarious, sympathetic, beautiful, positive, you name it. Really good Brodigan novel. Also, An Unfortunate Woman is probably one of his funniest books, but it's also one of his saddest. So, and the last one, I tried to bind it up. Of course, I'm talking about Gargantua and Pantagruel. I haven't yet summoned the stones to go past the second book, but I'm gonna do the second book sometime during this school year, I believe, and I really enjoy this. I tried to patch this up and realized that my first repair job should not be with the Black Spine Penguin Classics. This thing was terrible. It cost me, like, I want to say like $3 or $4. It was crazy, but I decided to reinforce it, and it didn't work. But Rabelais has such a nice, playful way of words. He accuses people of being diaboliculators. So, I mean, of course, the first book is just endlessly, just filled with endless boundless fun that you can have. It's really deeply funny book. There's some amazing poop jokes in here. It is kind of poop jokes of the novel, so be aware. But yeah, it's also satire, but you know, read for the poop jokes in this one. And I'm not even joking. Like it's of course it's more than that, and it's very good beyond that, but that is the main thing. If you don't like the poop jokes, don't bother. Alrighty. Okay, so I've done humor. I'll go briefly, and I'm already losing books. Where the hell did I put that? Oh man, I have my copy of Moby Dick out. Where did I put that? Oh, it's over here. Man, I'm sorry, I'm out of disorganized, but Beauty, of course, Moby Dick. I read this book. Certain chapters I have memorized. They're incredibly good, incredibly beautiful writing. Shakespearean, very good. I just read this when I want to just feel blown away with language, and just the idea that one man can conceive of a lot of these reflections and lay them out as beautifully as he did is very positive to me. It's very much like a sign of, you know, hope for humanity in some ways, that literature can reach this sort of height. I love Moby Dick, love it. So that's one. I actually don't have this poet's complete poems with me, although I, you know, Google all the time. Gerard Manley Hopkins, who is one of the most beautiful poets I've read, really uplifting poet, and really sympathetic poet in his terrible sonnets. I really loved Carry and Comfort. I'll not carry in comfort despair, not feast on thee, not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me. Or most weary cry, I can no more. I can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be. That idea of I can do something. Like he's like, I'm not gonna say I can't, I can. And he's like, what can I do? I can something. And I can hope, I can wish day will come. That's really beautiful, and it's really sympathetic, and it's just fantastic. And also that sort of positivity that those are two authors I'll go primarily for the beauty. Of course, Hart Crane works there as well, but Hart Crane I would put more in the joy positivity side of things. Although this list is very fluid, a lot of people can mix around. So Hart Crane's the only one I found for joy and positivity, although Tardier Vesas's Ice Palace is totally there. I like a lot of like playful kind of writers, but I don't tend to go back to that stuff the most. I tend to go for the beautiful, for the funny, and for the sympathetic. That's typically what I do. But Hart Crane totally belongs in there. Amazing poet. His poem Legend is like my soul in a poem. A lot of poems from that White Building collection, and his epic, The Bridge, is just fantastic. You really do read Hart Crane. You have to. Says me. And Immersion. These are two books that I haven't finished, but I realized that one of them I was actually waiting on finishing because I want to wait till I'm kind of like sad to get lost in this book. When I want to get immersed in a book, or when I'm really sad, I find just losing myself in a book and then coming back to the world. A lot of times that melancholy is just kind of past, and I can just kind of do whatever else in the world. And of course, The Fairy Queen. I don't think there are many books that are more immersive than this. It is a kind of it's a Middle English. It's past the Middle English. It's close to the Middle English though in terms of the language it's used. It's really interesting. I'm actually finished Canto 4 by now, and I really enjoyed it. Canto 4, Canto 1 are my favorites, but you have a really interesting sort of world. It's this rural space, this green space that is peopled with all types of Celtic monsters, Greek and Roman monsters from their folklore, and just a whole bunch of just crazy mythologies. It's a real mixing pot of myth and all these really interesting, imaginative kind of hijinks. I don't know. It's awesome. And there's the occasional interaction in this book that really speaks to me personally. The first time that despair, when the Knight of Faith has a conversation with despair, how despair is characterized. Of course, this is an allegory. That's why he can switch through all the mythologies with such ease and blend them together so blatantly. But as the Knight of Faith is talking to despair, one thing I really love is despair's the way it's characterized. It it is characterized as asking really leading questions that I think is very beautiful and very very telling of what despair is and my experience of it too. So absolutely, The Fairy Queen, it was the most immersive book I've ever read, probably. Definitely give it a shot, but again, it is sort of a great oddity, much like Melancholy. It's a great oddity. I love the passages he remixes Chaucer in, well, the passage I've read so far. I haven't read a ton of Chaucer, so I can't really say more than that what's going on. The last one is, of course, Emile Zola, whose book, The Fortune of the Rougons, I'm reading right now, and this thing is awesome. These nice, sweeping, huge narrative passages that go for about 30, 40 pages describing basically a person's entire life, and the way that he starts the narrative out with this really beautiful tone with Silver and Miette are meeting up, and they're two young people who love each other, and they go to fight. They get, okay, I don't want to get into this, but they get absorbed into this column that is going to march on some of the neighboring cities in, I think, 1850, 1851 in France, where there's revolutionary activity that's about to get put down hardcore. And then you get, that happens, you get everything that has led them to that point in this really sweeping narrative, again, thing, this sweeping narrative that is just impossible to stay on the outside of. I'm just in it all the time. I'm paying attention to everything, and I leave 2023 Ontario, and all of a sudden I'm in 1850s France. Of course, there are, you know, different types of people that are sort of brought in. There's the Macquarts, the Rougons, the entire family tree is kind of explained, at least down 3 generations, and it's just an amazing sort of family and social book that every time I enter it, I'm just sucked away, and I'm so impressed. This might be one of the best things I've read this year, frankly. But of course, I'll have to finish and see if he sticks a landing. I have about 100 pages left, so, you know. But that's delighted me to no end. And this last one, I've all of a sudden forgot all the books, and I want to keep this under 20 minutes. So this last one, I will just kind of say, oh, I got one over here. Where's my other one? Oh, I think I'm leaning, it's behind my camera. But okay, so this is something I try to do a lot. I really enjoy when I'm feeling sad. A lot of times it's because I feel a sense of like purposelessness, and I think that's pretty common amongst people. So one thing I do a lot of the time is I try to look for meaning in my own life, in things that I experience, you know, these tiny moments where something very important and beautiful is happening. And I really do think that if you just train yourself to see it, you can find those. And that is, in some ways, the best antidote to melancholy that I've ever come across, right? And of course, there are books and genres that do this type of thing. One of my favorites is Yasunari Kawabata's collection of Palm of the Hand stories, which are entirely mundane, but when you kind of get into them, they're all about finding meaning and making meaning in the most tiny, insignificant things that go on in your life. And I started writing those, and Volman's The Atlas works here. I started writing those, and I realized that, and this is years ago I'm talking about, but I realized that after writing a couple, I realized, yeah, those things really do help kind of condition me to look for those moments and to appreciate those moments and to identify those moments whenever they pop up. And of course, another thing that does this, and this is just in sight and also kind of, oh, sorry, it was falling. These condition me to sort of pick up meaningful sights in the world, specifically around the natural beauty. Run out of steam. Of course, I'm talking about haiku. This is one of my favorite haiku poets, Nicholas Virgilio. This is the haiku anthology edited by Cor Vandenheuvel. And of course, people like Basho, Buson, Issa, those poets are incredible. I have a Japanese poetry and anthology that does really interesting sort of renga. There's also a haiben form that I read a lot. I have 3 editions of modern haiku back at home that include a lot of like English language haiben and stuff like that. It's like prose and haiku. Really good stuff for if you want to, for identifying things in your life that are beautiful and meaningful and interesting. And if you write that stuff and you, again, keep it true to the spirit, looking at the world, describing the world, finding meaning in the world that relates to you, I guarantee you, you'll start seeing more meaning in your own life. And that's a very good, valuable, fulfilling thing. So yeah, these are the things I typically read when I'm feeling melancholy. There are some like differences here. Again, Zola is something that's just been benefiting me right now. I wanted to shoehorn in a book I'm reading right now, just to kind of discuss it without doing what everyday reads. But yeah, that's it. That's all. I'll chat with you later, I suppose. And, thanks for sticking around with an old chunk of coal like myself who's rambling on about this type of thing. I'd like to hear about what books you seek when you're sad, and what books do you stay the hell away from? A lot of the confessional poets, I'm staying away from. I'm staying away from Plath. I'm staying away from Berryman. I'm staying away from Sexton. I'll sometimes read Snodgrass, but not that much. But yeah. Anywho, thanks a lot. Peace and groovy. And stay well too. Stay well, bud.